All right. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Moneyline MMA, returning from what felt like forever. A long awaited return for the UFC, as we have not had fights for the last 3 straight Saturdays. Last fights haven't been since December 14th, and we're resuming, starting off our 2025 UFC year off with a decent note, I would say, with Mackenzie Dern and Amanda Ribas being the headlining main event of UFC Vegas 101, in which Jose and I will be discussing today. Of course, for anyone that is new, we do a 5-weight pick system here at Moneyline MMA, in which we take 5 of the currently scheduled 14 fights for UFC Vegas 101, and we pick 5 fights and weigh them in order of confidence, with 5-weight being the most confident pick, 1-weight being the least confident pick. And essentially that gives not only 5 picks out of the card for everybody, but it assesses those picks in order of confidence. With the 5-weight obviously being our individual lock of the week. We make these picks individually and then only confer on them right before we start the show here, just so we know what order to go in, because we always start with our locks of the week. That being said, anyone who might be new, isn't familiar with that weight system, so let us know if you have any questions down below. But also, usually we would do a recap here, and we can do a recap. I'm not sure at this point if anyone really remembers. At this point, it's been so long. But the last fight that did occur, Jose and I did have Manel Kape actually is our identical 5 weights that we picked, and those did hit. It was a bit of a weird card. Otherwise, it was a card that Colby Covington had fought on, and Jose and I both put Colby as our 1-weight, thinking like if he's the Colby that he was, he can win that fight. And he kind of did the same thing against in that fight that he did against Leon, in that like it seemed like he didn't really start getting good hold of his wrestling and like getting a groove until the 3rd round. And by then he was all bloody and he had lost the fight by damage alone, really. So he was a little bit mad that they called the fight. The doctor ended up saying he couldn't see or whatever, so they called the fight, and he ended up getting mad. He said, "Let me fall on my shield at least." So you can respect Colby for wanting to tough it out, but he definitely did not really have a chance in that fight. So curious to see if he does return in the UFC. Maybe if he does, it's sort of a send off. He's getting to that point where you just wonder, maybe he fights for just a couple more paychecks, but otherwise, there's no championship run in Colby Covington's future. I'm sorry to say if you're a big Colby Covington fan. That being said, we're going to move on to this year, 2025 action. And since I've already explained how this works, we're going to go right into things. That'll be my 5-weight of Saturday afternoon. And that's going to take us to the co-main event of UFC Vegas 101. Co-main event is between welterweights Santiago Ponzinibbio and Carlston Harris. I really don't need to get too deep into this one. Obviously, this is going to, maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but most likely this is going to end up being a stand-in box match. Carlston Harris does have some recorded takedowns under his belt, but he doesn't really use them against many opponents. It's kind of one of those things where he'll land like 5 or 6 takedowns against one guy, and then he'll go a couple fights without landing a takedown, but his average is still, over a takedown per fight, just because of that one fight in which he landed 5. So I don't really anticipate, Carlston Harris does have 6 submission wins under his belt. I'm still not anticipating it to be a huge part of the fight, but the thing is, that's what my handicap will land to, right? Is Santiago has had a difficulty, honestly, striking, and that's, to me, what I look at Santiago as his strength, right? You see a positive striking differential. He's hitting more than he absorbs, so you would think that he'd be a great boxer, but in all reality, he's been outboxed by Muslim Salikov, he's been outboxed by Kevin Holland, he's been outboxed by Michel Pereira, Jeff Neal, right? And the only person who was able to outbox himself is Alex Morono, who we all know is a really good submission artist. Alex Morono is a good fighter overall, but in general, Alex Morono's strength is submission art, and I just don't see Santiago being able to come in here and beat a guy like Carlston Harris, who I think is going to clearly have a striking advantage. And if Santiago wants to try and go for takedowns like he did against Salikov, that doesn't concern me at all. Carlston Harris has 6 submission wins and 0 submission losses on his record. I think he's good enough on his back to be able to get back up or defensively go for submissions if needed. I don't know. I see this being a win by decision. I don't necessarily think he finishes Santiago, but I'm very confident here that Carlston gets the job done. One more note before I pass it on to Jose. Carlston Harris is only a minus 106 favorite. I find there to be great value on this pick. Santiago is technically the favorite at minus 120. So being able to get some good value here, in my opinion, on Carlston Harris, I said that was going to be my last point, but it's not, because I have one more thing to say in that Carlston Harris's only losses in the UFC is Chaos Williams and Shavkat. Those are some really good high-end fighters. I mean, Santiago's the one that's losing to Jeff Neal and Muslim Salikov, guys that maybe aren't going to ever be champions, much less are going to be like running for the belt right now, like Shavkat. So I don't know, just saying. I really think Carlston Harris has a really high level of competition already, even though he's only got 6 UFC fights, and I've been really impressed. Jose, what do you think?
Yeah, Nick. So for this one, I'm going to agree with you on Carlson Harris. He is my 3 weight. And as you mentioned, yeah, I think right now in this fight, it's definitely Carlson Harris's time to shine. Santiago Ponzinibbio, as you mentioned, he's not been looking so hot lately. He's only won two out of his, like 2 out of his last 8 matches, which is ridiculous. That being said, my bad. 2 out of his last 7.
Yes.
And yeah, my apologies. Yeah, 2 out of his last 7. And that being said, his most notable wins, there's Alex Morono, Miguel Beza, and Neil Magny, Mike Perry. Some of these guys are not even in the UFC anymore. And there's some of these guys are also just shadows of what they used to be honest. And so Santiago Ponzinibbio, he's been in the UFC for a while. He's just not as impressive as he used to be. The most impressive win, I think, his last real one was that Neil Magny win. And that was in 2018. Carlson Harris, as you mentioned, his losses are to Kalen Williams and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Those are the only 2 losses he has most recently. And other than that, I think he's been looking great in the UFC. He's got power, even though 5 out of his 19 wins come via KO/TKO. He has shown that he does have the power. Most likely, most recently, back when he beat Impa Kasangane back in 2021, first round KO, and before that, he had another first round submission. So, dude is a stopper. So that being said, I think this fight is not going to go the distance. Santiago, he's out of his 8 losses, he's been finished half of them. So that being said, I think Carlston is most likely to get a KO over Santiago Ponzinibbio or TKO. But that being said, yeah, I like Carlston Harris a lot, and I think he's going to touch up Santiago a lot more on the feet. I do think he's going to come in with slightly better boxing, and he's also going to have a 3-inch reach advantage. So that being said, I think on the feet, the striking, he's going to have the advantage, and then just because he has that 3-inch reach advantage, I just think he's going to tag up Santiago more and eventually finish him. So that being said, I have Carlston Harris. He is my 3-weight, and the reason he's not higher is just because Santiago has had wins where I was surprised he would bounce back and get the wins like that Neil Magny win, for example, and the Alex Morono one. So those type of fights it show him well, I thought he was gonna lose, but then he just shows that he still has that dog in him. So that being said, that's why Carlston Harris is my 3-weight.
Sounds good, man. Yeah, so we do agree, and it sounds like even though he's my 5-weight, you even had a little more conviction on the finish there. So I'd love to hear it. That makes me even more confident that Carlston Harris get the job done here for us. It's 8 total confidence points, and whether or not you think specifically he'll get the finish, you don't even need to bet any specific win method here to get some really good value, and that's what we'd like to see out here when we're making some bets. So definitely ride with some Carlston Harris action. Keep him on singles. If you're going to parlay, do one parlay, because you don't want him to be the reason you lose any more than one small parlay or anything like that. But that said, we're going to move on to Jose's 5-weight.
So for my 5-weight, this is going to be with the bigger boys. It's going to be at middleweight, and it's going to be the matchup between Cesar Almeida and Abdul Razak Alasan. Right now, Alasan, he is the betting underdog at plus 215, while Cesar Almeida is a big betting favorite at minus 290. This one, I'm going with Cesar Almeida. He's proven to be a finisher out of his 6 wins. 4 of them come via KO, and he's just been proving like even if he can't get the finish, he's been just showing to show dominance. Like his most recent matchup against Iro Pretoria, he just dominated that, went to unanimous decision. And Abdul Razak Al Hassan, he out of his 12 wins, he's got 12 KOs slash TKOs. But the thing is, if he doesn't finish you, then I think he's going. You can beat him, is what I'm saying. Like if he doesn't finish his opponent specifically early in the fight, then yeah, I think he's gonna end up losing it. I think his just cardio is just not there, and he ends up losing. Just I don't want to say he's given up, but it's just he's definitely someone that just lets it all out of the tank early on, and at his age, it can be extremely detrimental. He's already 39 years old, and I think it's just impressive, extremely impressive that all his wins have been finishes, and again, majority of them are in the first round. But if you can survive that first round against him and early on the second, then I think you can easily coast. Any fighter can almost coast to a victory, either decision and ultimately eventually finishing them if he gets tired enough. And I think Cesar Almeida, even though he's not been in the UFC as long, he has shown great experience. And that being said, like he's gone the distance and been able to show that he can stay dominant throughout. So if he doesn't finish Abdul Razak Al Hassan, I think Cesar Almeida is just going to ultimately win unanimously. And how they match up physically is Almeida is the bigger dude. He's 6'1", while Abdul Razak Al Hassan is 5'10", and Cesar Almeida only has a 1-inch reach advantage. So that being said, yeah, and then and also with the striking differential, like Abdul, he throws a high volume, but he gets tagged up a lot. And again, that's mostly because if he's not finishing those dudes early on, I do think that the rest of the fight then is just going to be him slowly breaking down and getting picked apart by his opponent. So I think that's what Cesar Almeida is ultimately going to do in this matchup. So I have him winning this. I don't know if I'm not as confident as my last pick whether he's going to get the KO on Abdul Razak Al Hassan or not, but I do have the confidence that he's gonna come out victorious in this one. What are your thoughts on this fight, Nick?
Man, after hearing what you had to say and looking at it, man, I have Almeida. I agree with you as a 3-weight. I'm almost thinking about a 4-weight, man. But when we get to my 4-weight, we'll discuss that. I'm not gonna switch it officially, but man, Cesar Almeida looks really good in this spot. I respect Abdul Razak Al Hassan a lot. Of course, his background in judo is very dangerous in the clinch, against the cage. I just don't think he uses it that much. Of course, if it's one of those things where maybe the opportunity doesn't present itself all that often. But in all reality, man, his UFC tenure has been pretty subpar. I believe he's 6-6 in the UFC, and that's kind of a mixed bag of decent and bad opponents and high level opponents. But I mean, let's be real. When we look at all of the fighters that he's fought against, his best win might be Nico Price in 2018. I mean, Abdul is at the tail end of his UFC career as well, I would say, because he's 39 years old. He's certainly not getting any younger or any quicker or any, like he might be getting slightly better as he practices MMA more, and kind of parts from his judo specific style. But I just see this being really good matchup style for Cesar Almeida. Cesar Almeida has a slight size advantage, but other than that, I mean, Cesar Almeida's looked really good in his UFC fights, only losing via split decision to Kopylov, who we will discuss at some point later in this show. But that being said, man, I've just been impressed with Almeida as of late. The numbers he's been putting up in terms of strikes landed versus strikes absorbed is very impressive. And maybe if Razak Al Hassan had slightly more difficult competition, I'd be more inclined to say, like, okay, maybe he's a little bit of a sleeper, but he hasn't been able to beat, guys in the past like Chaos Williams, Jacob Malkoun, Joaquin Buckley. Those are the kinds of guys I would expect you to beat if you're also going to beat Cesar Almeida. So we're going to agree this will be another instance of 8 total confidence points on Cesar Almeida as a pretty big favorite here in this case, though, at -2, what is it, -290, yep.
Yes, sir. So yeah, that being said, yeah, this is one another one we agree on. We both have Cesar Almeida.
That being said, let's move on to my 4-weight. And my 4-weight is going to actually take us into the main event of Saturday afternoon. This is Mackenzie Dern versus Amanda Ribas. And if I understand the history of this fight correctly, they were initially going to be a co-main event. I think of the Colby Covington card, then it got pushed back. Another the main event of this card, and also from what I understand is that at first Mackenzie Dern, in that first like release of that fight that was going to happen at the tail end of last year, Mackenzie Dern was listed as the favorite. I saw some cards in which had Ribas as a dog, but then the fight got rescheduled, and of course, since that happened, all those fight bets become refunded, and it becomes betting at um, the new schedule, right? So all those bets are refunded, and the line changes, and now Ribas is somewhat of a large favorite at minus 220, 2.2 to 1 over Mackenzie Dern. So somewhat of a fascinating change in the or the scope of the public view in this fight, and I think it makes complete sense, man. If Ribas was still an underdog, I would have put her as my 5 weight, just based on the value alone. But considering the public seems to be catching on a little bit, the value is drained a little bit from where it used to be. But still, I do see Ribas as a great value pick here. Minus 220 is a little difficult to find a good. You can bet that as a single. Maybe bet it in a parlay or two, but in the end, Ribas is just, in my opinion, as good or better in every facet of the game. Okay, maybe, Mackenzie Dern on her back is always going to be probably the most dangerous woman jiu-jitsu wise. So maybe you can give that to Dern, but I think in every other aspect, whether it's wrestling, whether it's boxing, Ribas is going to have a pretty good advantage here. As far as size goes, these girls match up pretty evenly. I think, technically Dern might have an inch of height. Ribas has a couple inches of reach. So it's kind of nor here nor there with a size advantage. But as far as the style goes, I just think Mackenzie Dern's going to try and get it to the ground. And if she doesn't get it to the ground, it's over. And the thing is even if she does get it to the ground, I'm not convinced that she's able to just like cruise to a submission win or anything like that. Ribas is a big deal. She's never been finished, and if Mackenzie Dern is able to be the one that finishes her, then I'm impressed. But I don't anticipate Ribas to mess around at all with the ground game. And if she does get taken down, I expect Ribas to get right back up. I think we both can agree that Mackenzie Dern is no wrestling savant and has very bad technique when it comes to landing takedowns. It's more or less takedowns against the cage and or knockdowns. So Ribas, to me, here has a great stylistic advantage here. And assuming she isn't stuck on her back or in a bad spot jiu-jitsu wise, she'll be able to get the decision win. Jose, what are your thoughts?
Yes. So this is going to be one we're going to disagree on. I do have Mackenzie Dern taking this win, but she is my two. Reason is, as you mentioned, Amanda Ribas is extremely dangerous, and I do not doubt that she will not be worried anywhere where this fight goes, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. And as you mentioned, yeah, Mackenzie Dern does get sloppy with those takedowns. She always tries to go for like an overhead and try to like throw her opponents as well, and it just always ends up just being like an awkward fail, and then her opponents just taking her down instead. And for this instance, like I think Mackenzie Dern, she's going to get clipped up for sure. It's not going to be a pretty fight, is the way I view it. I think that it's going to be a grueling one, and on the floor, she's going to really work hard and fight for that submission. That's the way ultimately I think it's going to happen. I think the fight's going to get taken down to the ground. She's probably going to be put on her back. She's probably going to be smothered and held down for a bit, like she's been in the past. And then I think she will get a submission victory win, or even decision, because even though Amanda Ribas has good hands, Mackenzie Dern has just always been getting better. At least like her hands has been getting slightly better and faster. So, and just we haven't seen her since August now, and she came off with a unanimous victory over Lupita Gudinez, and in that one, Lupita herself, like she's one that can like really take it out and drag the fight on, and she in a striking match. So that being said, like Mackenzie Dern was able to show a little more of herself in that fight, but in this one, I think it's not going to be the easiest win for Mackenzie Dern, but just a grueling one. I expect to see a better version of her, so that's why I think she's ultimately going to get this win. But again, she is my two-way. Amanda Ribas, she's good. She's just her recent loss to Rose Namajunas, and there's no shame in there. But also Rose is kind of like Rose has gotten some wins, but she's definitely not the same Rose that when she was champ. And Rose is kind of, I think, on her way out the UFC as well, even though she's only got one loss right now. She's just not been as active and And so and that's just a discussion for another time. But like that being said, like yeah, just losing to Rose is not the biggest L in the world, but like I just can't see her taking I it's not like she lost to a super elite level fighter, so that's why I have like I'm somewhat hopeful that she can lose to a fighter like in Mackenzie Dern's caliber, if that makes sense. So that being said, yeah, I'm going with Mackenzie Dern, but she is my two weight.
Okay, sounds good. So we will disagree, and I can admit some value. Plus 168 is not bad at all for a fighter with as high of a caliber as Mackenzie Dern. I guess I'm just too concerned about the striking aspect. Mackenzie Dern's never landed a KO. She's been finished, although it was only once by Andrade, and that's kind of some unique ability there from Andrade to get the finish. I don't anticipate Ribas to win this by a finish. Really, I would expect it to be decision, or Dern gets a submission. I'm kind of anticipating that to be the most likely outcomes. But yeah, either way, this is a good stylist. This is a good matchup by the UFC, I believe, in general, just for this division. And yeah, man, I think it'll tell a lot. Because yeah, I don't mean to continue the Rose discussion, but it is interesting, like what part of career Rose is in. I'd like to think that she's still really good. I mean, because she's only 32, right? It's not like she's, like Abdullah Razak Al Hassan, who's 39 out of his at the tail end of his career. But either way, I digress, and this will be their first disagreement of the night.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I guess yeah, like sorry, I was gonna say for the Rose thing too. Just one more thing, yeah, like she may not be on the end of the outer way out the door yet, but just how last year has been the most active she's been in a long time, so it could be like a resurgence of her career. But that being said, like I probably need to see more of Rose to have a better assessment, I guess, on how that loss to Rose ages for Rebus.
Yeah.
But that being said, yeah, this is definitely one we're gonna disagree on. I have Dern, but I have low confidence on Dern as my two weight.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So that brings us then to your four weight.
In my four weight, this is going to be the middleweight bout between Chris Curtis and Roman Kopylov. Right now, Chris Curtis is a betting underdog at plus 210, while Roman Kopylov is a betting favorite at minus 280. This one, I'm going with Chris Curtis. I'm going with the underdog in this one. I think like even though for his age, like he's kind of getting up there now already. Him being 37, I think he can just still be in there and hang with them. Going split decision with Brandon Allen is I think that's no shame in that. Brandon Allen was like on a phenomenal tear up until he ran into Nazardine Emavov. But that being said, like Chris Curtis almost beating him says a lot. Chris Curtis, like he was on his own streak himself for a bit, and he's just been kind of on and off to losing to like Hermanson beats Joaquin Buckley, who now now that win over Joaquin Buckley aged well with Joaquin Buckley getting that Kobe Covington win. And back losing to Kevin Gastelum, which is like, how can you lose to Kevin Gastelum after you just beat Joaquin Buckley? So, I think this one though, it is a good one. Is a good matchup for Chris Curtis, and to really showcase like he does belong to hang out with some of the guys in the in the higher top 10. Maybe not necessarily 1 through 5. That win with Joaquin Buckley probably does prove that he can at least hang with like somewhere on the fives, like 5, 6, and 7 dudes. And that being said, like I think Chris Curtis brings what he brings to the table is just a lot of experience and power with his fights. Out of his 31 wins, 17 of them come via KO/TKO. And if he's not able to finish someone, he's shown that he can get a victory over them regardless in the hands of the judges. While Roman Kopylov, he is only 32 years old. He does have a good amount of experience and a lot of wins, and he's a finisher. And the thing is Chris Curtis, he's only out of his 11 losses, he's only been stopped twice, once via KO and once via submission. And Roman Kopylov, he all his fights are pretty much KOs as TKOs except for 2. So if he can't finish Chris Curtis, it's gonna come down to decision. And in that case, I'm gonna go with the more experienced vet in Chris Curtis. And again, Chris Curtis still has that power too, so he can make it lights out for And the chances of Chris Curtis submitting Roman Kopylov is very unlikely. So that being said, I'm going with Chris Curtis, the underdog. How they match up physically, not much of an advantage for either or. But the only advantage I would say Roman Kopylov can take on Chris Curtis is that Chris Curtis does get tagged up a lot. He actually absorbs more strikes than what he lands. But he lands a high volume of punches though, 5.76 significant strikes landed per minute. So that being said, if Roman Kopylov can take advantage of that and throw a high pace, the fight could swing his way. But in the end, I just like the value of Chris Curtis being the underdog in this specific matchup. And so that being said, that is why he's my 4-weight. What are your thoughts on this one, Nick?
This will be another disagreement from us here. I have Roman Kopylov as my two-weight pick. Roman Kopylov is a somewhat significant favorite here, so you're taking Chris Curtis at great value here. And man, I wanted to take Chris Curtis. I'm a big fan of his, so this isn't nothing against Chris Curtis, and I like Chris Curtis a lot. Seems like such a nice stand-up guy. Of course, he's friends with Sean Strickland, so you kind of like him just because of that. But in any case, I just really like. I guess I see this a little differently than you because I see what you're saying. Like, yeah, in a boxing match, I might take Chris Curtis. Like, but even then, Chris Curtis still has a negative striking differential, and yeah, like he has fought a lot of good fighters. You know, Jack Hermanson and those guys are not bad names to lose to at all. But I think Kopylov has proven that he's kind of at that level too by beating Cesar Almeida. And that's a guy we just discussed earlier in the show, and we both are backing Cesar Almeida. And you know, you seem to be pretty confident. I'm pretty confident. I don't know. I think beating Cesar Almeida, you know, was a split decision, so it wasn't necessarily like a take home, like, oh, this is like a knockout glorious win. But I guess I'm taking away most from that is 5 takedowns and over 8 minutes of control time for Roman Kopylov. And I think Curtis is arguably a turtle on his back if he gets taken down. I don't think Chris Curtis has much of a chance at all at getting up. I could be wrong. He does a lot of work with Sean Strickland, who's got some good wrestling background, but those just aren't the kinds of guys to go in the gym and wrestle. They like to box, they like to spar, do this and that. And I don't think Chris Curtis is going to be expecting Kopylov to do much takedowns. And I just think it's an extra level to Kopilov's game that's going to help kind of excel him to being a little bit higher of a tier than Chris Curtis. I'm not sure Kopylov is like championship level material. He'll have to improve a decent amount to get to that point. But for now, my main handicap towards picking Kopylov here is just that I think he's as good of a boxer, maybe slightly worse, but I think they're pretty even, him and Chris Curtis. But in the end, if he does feel dangerous, if he feels like he might be taking too much damage, he can go for a takedown. He's got pretty good wrestling, over 50% accuracy on hhis takedowns, and I think that right there could land him a couple extra points to get the decision win.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, like if that would be a big dictator in this fight too, is how much wrestling Roman Kopylov I think does put like he brings to the table and how much pressure he's gonna put on Chris Curtis. And but as you mentioned, Chris Curtis he deals with people like Sean Strickland a lot, but Sean Strickland is more. I don't see him going as much and holding people down like that as much anymore. I mean, Sean Strickland actually does have like a jujitsu background, and like earlier on in his career, he was a lot more of a grappler, and now he's like almost like a completely different type of fighter. Um, but that being said, like Chris, yeah, like just super well rounded. I almost think like he is like he would be ready for this matchup, and I think we do see different fights. I agree with you on that as well on this how we view it. And Roman Kopylov can completely actually dominate Chris Curtis on the feet too, and TKO him as well. If he gets carried, if he can go in that direction, I can see it as well. So that being said, I do have Chris Curtis though. He is my 4. I feel confident. I'm taking the vet. I like the value of him as an underdog. So that one, yep, he is my 4-weight.
All right, so that is the second disagreement of the show. We've got one more fight to go. So far, 2 agreements, 2 disagreements, and we've all picked the same fights. And let's close it off with both of our one weights by process of elimination here. Let's see if we do or don't agree, because I guess that's a spoiler on the fact that we are picking the same fight. But in the end, we have Austin Bashi versus Christian Rodriguez. Currently, according to the website here on Tapology and the UFC website, it looks like this will be the second fight of the main card. Of course, usually they do 6 fights on the Apex main card. So in case maybe injuries or weigh-in issues, you still have room to move those around and have 5 fights at the worst. or everything works out perfectly and you keep 6 on the main card and it's not too big of a deal. But in any case, this is a UFC newcomer in Austin Bashi. You know, he's obviously a featherweight with CLD. CLD, that's a different fighter. Christian Leroy Duncan is not who I'm talking about. Christian Rodriguez is who I'm talking about, coming out of Rufus Sport in somewhere near my hometown in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You know, kind of a guy that we've discussed, I feel like at least 3 or 4 times now on the show. And Jose and I are pretty good, I think, at identifying Christian Rodriguez and where his strong suits are. Of course, he kind of came onto the scene, for the lack of a better term. He was already in the UFC, but he came onto the scene by beating Raul Rosas and kind of ending that whole, nonsense. Raul Rosas is so good. This is amazing. He was the first one to beat Raul Rosas, and since then he also beat Cameron Simon, who at the time was a pretty big prospect, and gave him the first loss on his record, and then fought Isaac Dalgarian. So that's 3 straight prospect fighters with undefeated records that he went against, and beat them all until he lost to Julian Erosa, who obviously is far from undefeated, has 40 professional fights under his belt, and got choked out in the first round. So maybe one of those situations where it's kind of like, yeah, you might be able to beat those young gunners, but there still is levels to this game, and Christian Rodriguez might still find himself kind of that middle echelon of the UFC. But here we are again in a similar boat with Christian Rodriguez fighting an undefeated UFC newcomer. This kid's coming from the Dana White's Contender Series, in which he choked out Dorian Ramos, kind of on a ridiculous streak. He's obviously never lost, and he's been able to win his fights. A couple by KO, a couple by submission, a couple by decision. And I think that kind of plays into why he's got so much hype going behind him. For example, he's minus 290 as a favorite to beat Christian Rodriguez as a plus 215 dog. So you know me, anyone who's listened to this show already knows that I'm going to be saying that I made this pick because of value. I think this is insane. Getting a guy who's established UFC veteran, who's beat multiple UFC newcomers with undefeated records, and when at the time he was a dog. Let me remind you, excuse me if I can speak actual words, let I remind you that he was plus 200 against Raul Rosas. Dusted him, right? He was a favorite against Cameron Simon, so he came through there. But he was another underdog against Isaac Dalgarian. He gets the job done as an underdog. Two of those 3 prospect fights, he was an underdog. He gets the job done. I understand that Bashi has an incredible acumen, might be the right word, at finishing fights. He hasn't gone to a decision since before he went on a really nice run at Lights Out Championship. That was back in 2022, in which he went to his first decision. He's been finishing guys, choking them out, mostly chokes. He has 1 KO and 4 rear naked chokes or choke variations in the last couple of years to get all his finishes. But without rambling on, I've got Christian Rodriguez here for mostly obvious reasons. I believe he is a staple of the UFC, specifically a guy who can prove he can make these new featherweights prove if they belong in the UFC or not. It's almost never am I going to take a UFC newcomer as that big of an underdog, as that big of a favorite. Almost having to pay $300 to win $100 on a guy who has never fought competition this high is crazy to me. Definitely curious to see what Jose's got, but this is a relatively high confidence one weight for me in Christian Rodriguez.
Yeah, Nick, this one really makes me really consider my pick. I am going with the Austin Bashi. But the way you put it makes sense. Yeah, like it's his debut, and him being this big of a favorite against an established UFC fighter is kind of crazy. I agree with that. But Christian Rodriguez, he's shown like I think some flaw, a little bit of flaws in his game. And even though he did get that win, I think when he went against Raul Rosas Jr., I think I did have Raul Rosas Jr. and Christian Rodriguez was able to show us all who he really is and come back and get two wins. But he squeezed by with a split decision win over Isaac Dalgarian, and then gained submitted right off the bat by in the first round by Julian Erosa. And Julian Erosa, we obviously have talked about him before, and he's on a 2-fight losing streak right now. And he, honestly, that's a pretty respectable fight with Austin Bashi. Yeah, this one is just how well versed he is, and I think what's going to happen is he's going to just pretty much bring wrestling to the table. I think he's going to ground and pound Christian Rodriguez, and I don't know if he was going to finish Christian Rodriguez. As you mentioned, he's an extremely well-rounded fighter, extremely young. I think this may be a decision win for Austin Bashi, but it's a very low confident pick, very very low confident. But if I were to say if I went for Christian Rodriguez, I would probably view it like in a similar boat too, where I think that he would just it would be more control time than anything. Striking wise, like I'm not really sure who I would actually give it more to, just because I haven't seen enough of Austin Bashi's striking, to be exact. But the dude does have hands and have power. Out of his 13 wins, he does have 3 KOs as TKOs, and gained one more recently in June. Again, in a local promotion against Zach Riley. Not and But that being said, like on Dana White Contender Series, he showed that he can get the submissions done. This one, very low confident for Austin Bashi. I think he's just going to be an aggressive young guy obviously making his official UFC debut, and them putting him against Christian Rodriguez just says a lot of what they think about Austin Bashi. And this being said, yeah, I'm sticking with Austin Bashi. But as you mentioned, there's absolutely no value in going for an underdog, going for a favorite that's making their debut, especially this big. I definitely do see more value. I'll now acknowledge that I definitely see a lot more value, and it can almost be a steal maybe if going for taking Christian Rodriguez, I would say. But that being said, like this one, I like Austin Bashi just because I think he's well rounded. I just think he's gonna out wrestle Christian Rodriguez. Essentially, is what I'm saying. But Christian Rodriguez could even get he could probably sneak in a submission on Austin Bashi, but that could be very unlikely. So that being said, this one I'm going with Austin Bashi, just very low confidence because I do understand that Christian Rodriguez is an extremely dangerous fighter.
Sounds good, man. And you make a good point. Like, Christian is by far a high level wrestler. He's been able to use it to his advantage in the past, but even if we look against Raul Rosas's fight, like there was a lot of wrestling, and I guess to Christian Rodriguez's credit, he had 7.5 minutes of control time marked, and Raul Rosas had 4 minutes 50 seconds, so almost 5 minutes of control time. So Christian still did win the control time. You make, and to me that almost makes me think that he also won the scrambles because Raul Rosas landed 3 of 16 takedown attempts, and Christian landed 1 of 1. So in all reality, Rosas landed more takedowns but had less control time. I could be wrong, but I tend to think that's because of scrambles. And also, I'm assuming the one takedown Christian Rodriguez landed was more efficient, and he got more control time out of it than what Rosas was getting out of his. But in any case, there's no doubt in my mind that Bashi he's got the chance to wrestle and wrestle and wrestle and wrestle and win the fight just based off of that. And if that's the case, then all props to him because he's got a long future at the UFC if he's able to do that. So yeah, that said, this will be another disagreement. 3 disagreements, 2 agreements out of Jose and I, but this is both our one weights. I'd say it sounds like I'm a little more confident in Christian Rodriguez than Jose is Austin Bashi, but of course I'll take C Rod, and Jose will be taking Austin Bashi, and we shall see what comes out of that, and hopefully we'll get some satisfying outcomes. It's always disappointing when fights get canceled between our show and the fight's actually occurring. So hopefully all these picks end up coming to fruition for us. And obviously, if that does happen, one of us will be a little more happier than the other next week because just by straight math, since we have 3 disagreements, two of those have to agree with one of us, and therefore we'll win. So curious to see who can get more picks correct for next Monday. Of course, we will be returning as always. Now that the UFC has returned, Moneyline MMA has returned, and just as a quick follow-up, we are going to have a pay-per-view next week. So, of course, January 11th is the card we just discussed with Dern and Ribas as the headline. And then on January 18th, a week from Saturday, we'll get Islam Makhachev defending his belt against Arman Sarukian. That'll be a really interesting lightweight fight. I think those are by far the 2 best lightweights on the current planet. I couldn't think of anyone better suited, I guess, if you really want to, maybe say Oliveira, but I think that's about it. I think those are by far and away the best lightweights on the planet. And the week after that, we're actually going to get another break. So definitely be back with us next Monday because that'll be a pay-per-view going into a break in which we won't get another fight until February 1st. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and have a great week.